You ready for this?
Where shall we go? Let's have a random landing. Space, baby! Oh, is it the universe, man?
What? And that's just the beginning. I have to see the next thing. And the next, and the next.
You called.
Oh, this is so cool to open.
Hold to open.
Yes, and what do you do?
It's got a perception filter, so it helps you fit into every time and place.
Come on. We've got work to do.
Now, stay back. We are going to rock through time.
Hello, and welcome to Pull to Open, normally an ongoing quest to watch all of Doctor Who, the entire television program, in random order. But this time we've got a little something different for you coming at you midweek. I'm Pete Pachal.
And I'm Chris Taylor, and yes, it is finally here, the new season of Doctor Who, Season 1, if you're a newbie, Season 14, if you are a new Who aficionado.
Except it's not here, Chris. It's almost here for most everybody, but it is here and has been here for the likes of at least one of us. Which is to say, here on the day this podcast will be released, something has happened. And what has happened is it's a thing that's been actually lifted.
Yes.
So tone of silence was in place up until now about certain aspects of the new Doctor Who that has been removed. Can you please describe in detail?
Okay, so embargos. Brief history of embargos. Embargos are what companies tend to impose on us journalists if we agree to get certain pieces of information in advance. Then we also agree that we can't reveal that information beyond a certain date. It's most often used in the entertainment realm, in tech news and other stuff. It's used to say, you know, hey, we got a big announcement coming on this day. Take a look in advance. With entertainment news, it's often we have screeners. And now of course, Doctor Who is now with Disney Plus in the US, and that means that Disney are handling a lot of things about the publicity. They are winging Ncuti and Millie to New York journalists as we speak.
Nice.
My colleagues are going to be talking to them in a couple of days from now, from when we're recording. But yes, if you watch the last episode where we talked about the church on Ruby Road, you'll notice the agony that I was in of being unable to talk about having seen episodes 1 and 2 of the new season because this embargo was in place. And now the embargo has lifted. Disney also requests that I not spoil things, but we can at least have a conversation about these.
Yeah, that's one of these things that's actually, frankly, annoying for everyone with regard to these embargoes, which is to say they are very detailed. So, first of all, I'll say it's nice to be able to do this. So I'll throw that out there just as the caveat to everything, and not just. You know, it's nice that we got this in advance. It's also, or you got this in advance, including we. I'm just riding your coattails here on this one. But, we talk about, being journalists at the beginning of most of our podcasts. And it's true. We are. It's just that this, I think this shows it's very true.
Yes.
So you're a part of the select few who would get to watch the episodes in advance.
Yeah. We've both sort of gone back and forth in our career. I'll say that, we've covered Doctor Who at different times. I've stepped away from it. You've stepped away from it various times. It's not always been our main focus in our career. However, yes, for this time, because I have a pre-existing relationship with Disney, I, write about Star Wars a lot. Obviously, that's what my book was about. So that's, mainly why I get on these lists of screeners. I'm a trusted journalist in that sense. And now here I am covering Who again. In fact, about to write 5 stories about Doctor Who and Mashable this week.
Impressive.
All based on stuff that's coming out of these first 2 episodes. So I'm excited to say what I can say about them.
Well, I hope everyone else is excited to hear about those views in podcast form. perhaps the night they are broadcast. I keep saying broadcast, but I guess it is a broadcast.
Yeah.
When they're finally available publicly, we'll definitely have something special for y'all from both of us, because we'll have both seen it at that point. But I was just going to say about the embargoes, they always get sort of annoying with what you can say and what you can't say. And it's all understandable. They want to make sure certain spoilers don't get out there into the ether. But it does become kind of a dance with the facts and the plot and all the things that happen in these episodes. And listeners, we are about to dance.
Yes.
I haven't seen them. Chris has seen them. So I am going to be the journalist here on behalf of you guys and try to get as much information as I can out of Chris without hopefully violating any agreement and therefore forbidding any future screeners.
I have here a list of 8 things in red that I cannot reveal, 4 for each episode, and I have it right next to my screen here. So I'm like making sure that I'm dancing around those things. And Pete's job as a good journalist is to see exactly just how close he can dance to that, reveal stuff without revealing what Disney considers spoilers. So this should be an interesting conversation.
All right. First question. Who killed JFK? Well, I was going to start with the zoom out question, which is that this is now season 1. We've had the specials, we've had the Church on Ruby Road, which we just talked about in the main podcast. But this is now the beginning of season 1, and you've seen 2 full episodes in, which isn't comprehensive, but it should give you a sense of, okay, what is the tone of this season? So that is my first question. What is the tone of this season?
I'll first of all say that, as far as Disney's concerned, we've already kind of seen episode 1, in that along with these screeners, they sent out the Church on Ruby Road. So it's like, hey, you have 3 screeners. The first one turned out to be the one we've already seen. But that is a good indication that stylistically, in terms of tone and in terms of the overall season arc, this is a continuation of the Church on Ruby Road. So even though they're going to be listed as episode 1 or 2, even though you can jump on board here, episode 1 has very much got that kind of Rose feel to it, of like, or the pilot feel, or like, an episode where the Doctor is explaining a lot about being the Doctor and living in the TARDIS, right? Even so, it is a continuation from the Church on Ruby Road in a lot of ways. And I'll also say something more about the overall tone that, Pete, I wonder if I might have you spitting a little fury when you see some of this, is that it's they're sort of definitely starting off, especially in the first episode, by going back to basics, but in terms of like, let's get the younger kids on board. Now, that might not be much of a surprise, given that we all know that the first episode is called Space Babies.
Right. So we had goblins, which are kind of babies already, these tiny creatures that really can't speak English and are just kind of goofy and like to cackle.
Yes.
And now episode 1, Space Babies. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of it in the teasers. Maybe we have. I don't know. It's hard to know what's from what episode. But my first question about is this as dumb as it looks?
Well, first of all, Space Babies it's kind of in the Wild Blue Yonder mode. Think of the way the Wild Blue Yonder had like the Newton stuff up front. And it almost felt like a different episode. Yeah. Right? Similar thing happens here. The Doctor takes Ruby on a short trip. Stuff happens, stuff that you've already seen in the trailer. Then we go into the Space Babies plotline. Now, is it as dumb as Space Babies sound? Well, you've probably seen, they do this a lot in commercials where they get babies' mouths to move as if they're talking, right? Sure. A lot of that stuff has fallen into the uncanny valley, kind of Kind of freaks people out. Your mileage may vary. I think given that they've done a pretty good job here of making the babies talk. First of all, they talk. That is not a thing I'm invade against to not reveal. The babies talk English. They are space babies, so they're more advanced and they talk. So it's not like the goblins, these are actual babies.
So I'm getting the sense we either are or aren't getting a final resolution on the question of whether the doctor can speak baby.
That's a good point. I hadn't actually thought of that. Thank you for bringing that up. Because, of course, that was in Closing Time.
Yep, Closing Time.
And then wasn't there one other episode where the doctor said to speak baby?
Probably. He spoke Crow or something, or Crow spoke English, or I don't know. Better.
Yes, given
less about the Crow one, the better, I think.
Indeed, yeah. Well, so given that the TARDIS's translation technology, it is entirely possible that what is happening here is the TARDIS speaks baby, but
right.
Given that there's also a human in this story, an adult human.
Right.
Who's not a space
the babies
baby.
are human. Well, I don't hope, but they look human.
They are human. And their carer is also human. But the carer speaks to the babies and treats us as normal as if babies can speak. So I think that the babies are just speaking whatever standard language exists in the future. Oh, and yes, actually we know what it is. The doctor shows us. There's it's one of those things where he's like explaining that the TARDIS will translate, and so he shows Ruby like what the signage on this future space station where he meets the space babies is, and it's actually sort of kind of a mixture of like Chinese script and other stuff, so yes, it is the future language of Earth that they are speaking here, and I think one very wise decision, just to close the loop on the babies speaking, one very wise decision was that we don't actually get a lot of close-ups of the babies speaking, so there's very, very limited amount of time where you have to kind of consider the uncanny valley.
Got it. So not so much like, what was that movie? Less Look Who's Talking. Or is it kind of like Look Who's Talking? Because occasionally you had the babies talking to folks. I don't know. Maybe that speaks to my generation. Then maybe I'm more okay with the babies talking stuff. But then again, then there was the more recent. I don't think it was a Pixar movie, but what was it? Boss Baby.
Yeah, Boss Baby.
So less Boss Baby, more Look Who's Talking, or like a weird melding of the two.
It's a kind of a weird melding because the thing is that they are babies, even though they speak, in perfectly normal, English, according to the TARDIS translation. They are still babies in their sense of innocence. So there's no sort of wisecracking, smart boss baby type stuff here. It's more like if you are going to be touched by this episode, and I think some people will be, it's more about that sense of innocence of if babies could talk, if babies could learn about the world around them and were a little bit precocious.
Interesting. So it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for going highbrow and lowbrow with this, because I would imagine they could not resist doing some of the more cliche crap about wet nappies or what have you.
Oh my God, do they ever? I will say that
they have to go there when you do something with babies.
Yes, kind of have to go there. I will say there are multiple kinds of fluid on show. Well, not on show. There's one kind of fluid on show, and there's one that's just talked about. Right. I think
which one is the one talked about.
I think what we may have to go do here when we're actually talking about it is go back to Sleep No More.
Okay, interesting.
And remember, one of our critiques of that at the time was like, eye boogers. Really?
One of our? What's this we stuff? Yeah, no. I remember. Yes, go back. I was one of our first podcasts in the random.
Yeah, it was pretty early on.
Okay, so before I go, we get into the second episode, which is the
Mhm.
Devil's Chord, and I also have some more sort of overall questions.
Mhm.
But I do have a question about the two episodes together, which is to
Yep.
say, this does look like the tried and tested formula with new doctors, with new companions. You do one in the future, you do one in the past, and where those land, your mileage obviously varies. So
Mhm.
here we're doing Space Station of the Future with babies. Now we're doing the past, relatively recent past, compared to some other initial trips to the past for various companions. But the Devil's Chord does its thing in the 60s
Yes.
with the Beatles. And I guess I would say, does this have, well, I guess it's the same formula and it's early because you've only seen it a couple days ago. But where does this rank, would you say, with, compared to Rose in the End of the World and The Unquiet Dead, or Bill going to Thin Ice, which is, by the way,
Mhm.
our next up in our random adventure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Smile was her first trip to the future, and there's various others. We don't have to go over all of them, but
Mhm.
you don't have to rank it. But like you can if you want. But like, how does it compare?
I definitely got with the intro. I got Smile vibes for sure. I think that maybe the first 15 minutes or so of Space Babies may rank as one of the best introductions to Doctor Who out
Well,
there.
because it's that format you were talking about,
Mhm.
that they sort of start in one place and go to another. Interesting.
Yes, and Millie asks all the questions, and Ncuti answers them in interesting ways that I sort of think they're not incorrect. You're not gonna. I don't think you're gonna have any fans' heads exploding in sort of like that. This is new canon, but it's an interesting take on the classic Doctor Who tale, right? On all of the questions that a new companion would ask. Kind of feels like it's updated for a new generation. The emphasis on the Doctor's status as a refugee, for example. We do have confirmation here that Gallifrey was destroyed and he's the last of his kind again.
Okay.
That is very much accentuated. So
That's
it's
interesting
yeah,
because it seems to, obviously it echoes series one
yeah,
in a lot of ways, and I guess that's an interesting way to both sort of clean slate things, but also RTD to sort of feel comfortable in his,
yeah.
this is well trodden territory for him.
Oh
Does it
yeah.
feel, besides that, does it feel very RTD? And honestly, what does that even mean now? Because
Mm,
we've only gotten a few episodes, and I think we have a decent feel for what RTD 2023 2024 means. But
yes.
what does it feel like so far?
First of all, I got to say I really love the moniker. And I don't know where I picked this up. That what we're dealing with here is RTD2.
Yeah.
Because it does feel like RTD, but it feels like he knows he doesn't have to prove anything
Yeah.
to the fans, and he may be trying to tweak us a little bit in certain areas here. What it feels like is gleeful. I think that's the word that comes to mind. He is having fun with this. It shows. It's on screen in every frame. He's having fun with the Disney money. That's for sure.
Nice.
It definitely looks very, very expensive and feature filmy and Pixar-ish.
Did they use any of that Disney money to get the rights to any Beatles songs?
All right, so we're going into episode 2, The Devil's Chord. No.
I figured.
And that is perhaps like if you're looking at this from a spending money point of view, like we all know how much money it takes to license a Beatles song. There was that kind of
I don't know if
famous.
we all do, but
Okay, but you can guess. And it was sort of famously used in Mad Men. If you watch that, they had one episode where they used like not even a particularly well-known Beatles track, but Tomorrow Never Knows from the end of Revolver. Don Draper's listening to it. It doesn't even listen to the whole thing. But like Mad Men had to pay through the nose to get that.
what did they do for Yesterday? Was that just like, did they just like, it was just all the budget was getting the rights to the songs? I don't know. I'd have to check.
Yes. Oh, yesterday. That's cover versions. And of course, like then you'd have the issue of like, here we have actors pretending to be the Beatles. Are you going to have them mouth the Beatles song? But I will say that the plot very carefully gets around that by making it a plot point that the Beatles are not singing the music we know and love, and that's what's wrong.
Oh, interesting. So it's kind of like Doctor Who's version of Yesterday almost, but in sort of a reversal.
Yes.
I like that. That's pretty cool.
Right? No one's really thought of doing that. And there is, in fact, a moment where, and you've got to love this, we've been talking about Beatles and Doctor Who. It is Ruby who suggests that they go see the Beatles in Abbey Road, which they correctly point out was not called Abbey Road Studios in 1963, which is when they visit. And she's like, I've always wanted to see that. And the Doctor just sort of looks at her for a beat, as if he's about to say that's the stupidest idea he's ever heard. And he's like, that's amazing. Why did I never think of that? Yes. Which is kind of a wonderful behind the scenes joke, because we know from, we went to the Doctor's wife, and the original intro in the script, Neil Gaiman's script was the idea that the Doctor and Amy had just been to Shea Stadium to see the Beatles in 66. So it's never actually, the Doctor has never actually seen the Beatles. And of course, there's been this long history of connection between the two. And so just that sense of like, yeah, that's wonderful, that's epic, let's do it, is just will bring a smile to your face. As will the 1963 setting, because that year is not a coincidence. They deal with the obvious question.
Yeah, because he's a black man in 1963.
I wasn't going to say that's the obvious question.
That it's going to intersect with the show itself.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
The doc.
I do want to get back to the black man in 1963, though.
Yeah. That's a very good point. I mean, it is... it is London in 1963, which was already, very cosmopolitan.
Sure. Yeah,
and we're dealing in musician circles, so not necessarily that unusual that a black musician might. I guess
in terms of like getting away from that very specific historical sort of not incongruity, but the situation. Does the fact that the Doctor is black factor in at all in either of these episodes? Because obviously that's still a relatively new thing. How the show deals with it, maybe they don't do it, and maybe that's probably a good call. I don't know. Like, this is obviously new territory in some ways for the show, which is kind of weird in some ways and not in others. But anyway, does it factor in? I guess is sort of, I'm dancing around the question again, even though
it's a good question, especially as we are about to go to Thin Ice, which as we've said, like that explicitly deals with the problem of race and time travel. No, they're not dealing with it here. I think that maybe RTD is saving that for later in the season. I sort of feel like he will have his take on that sooner or later. Like, he didn't get to have a Thin Ice in his tenure, and it's an obvious thing that you've got to deal with.
He did and he didn't. I mean, with Martha, it was maybe not as full on in other times in sort of dealing with Whittaker as a woman and Bill as a black woman, stuff like that. But Martha, when she went back to Shakespeare,
but then it was dealt with positively in the sense of like, yes, London, and
then you also saw it in the Human Nature, right? We talked about that in our podcast.
Yes,
so it was there, and maybe that was all we needed at the time. But it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out, because in interviews that Ncuti Gatwa was done, I think in the Bridgerton episode, which I forget what the title is of now. It seems like that would be an obvious thing that would factor in.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Like let people get used to the Doctor sort of in this incarnation, and then maybe lean into it. Seems to be maybe the logic there.
Yes.
Cool.
And so
do you think, getting back to the Beatles stuff, do you think this is going to delight or infuriate Beatles fans?
I kind of liked it. Are you
as a Beatles fan? Because I had my Beatles phase, but I would never claim to be some kind of super fan. I just don't know enough.
Huge Beatles fan. I I'll probably be diving into the Beatles Chronicle once I watch this episode again to find out, were they in the MI studios on that actual day? Have they got that correct? There's only one thing that jumped out at me, which is that there is a point at which the plot requires the Beatles to know sheet music or to know notes on a page, even though they're not actually on a page. I said too much. But they're so.
Well, we've seen the notes floating in the air in the trailer.
Okay.
So,
okay, good.
That has happened. They have the scene where, no spoil. If you haven't looked at trailers, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast. There is a scene where you see Ruby being bound by the notes themselves, which is kind of a really cool image, and I kind of can't wait to see the context. I hope it isn't totally nuts, but kind of do. It is a little psychedelic. Anyway, go on.
It's a bit nuts, and really, the villain is so perfect for that kind of Disney-esque, floating notes in midair.
Maestro, they've talked about that too.
Maestro, played by Jinx Monsoon, who is extraordinary in this. Just really over the top. Really goes for it. Chews every piece of scenery.
So, getting back to the sheet music or lack thereof, they have to read the notes.
Yes, but of course they didn't know.
Famously never did.
They famously never learned. Even now, Paul McCartney does not know sheet music. He just admitted in his book on his lyrics that I just read. So that's the only thing that jumped out at me. I don't think they're the best Beatles lookalikes.
Interesting.
And you don't really get a lot of time to sort of delve into who they are. But the Doctor and Ruby do talk to John and Paul.
Oh, okay.
And what we get from them is a sense of this incredible sadness that music is missing from their world. So
I'm going to ask this question because I'm sure there isn't, but maybe this is a thing you can't reveal. Is there a reference to The Chase?
No, I really wish there were. But there is, there's a reference to other 1963 stuff, but not
The Chase
not 665.
Right?
Yeah,
you can't just go like, we got to get across town to BBC and record Ticket to Ride. And
right.
Like, wait a minute, I know what show you're doing.
Yeah, and Brian Epstein rushes in with hey guys, want to do Doctor Who? That would get pretty meta.
Okay, well, I want to get to some big questions, particularly about some other hidden things you probably can't tell us about. So we're going to get those out of you, perhaps. But first, I want to tell everyone, hey, guys, we are a podcast, and following us is a great idea to do on whatever podcast app you are on. You can also, of course, share with a friend. It's good times reviewing the podcast. Please, it is a great way to support the podcast, especially if you are not going to become a true companion, which you can do on YouTube right now and support the podcast that way. It's a monthly fee, of course, for about $8 a month. You could really support the podcast and get the podcast a day early for our regular random episode run. If that is too much for you, if that's too much of a commitment, you're like, wait a minute, I don't want to spend this monthly thing. I'm just going to cancel that at some point, blah, blah, blah. No, you wouldn't, first of all, because we're going to be doing this forever. But, well, as long as they keep making Doctor Who, we're going to keep doing it.
I have to drag us out of here.
You can, on the video, give us a super thanks. And what is that? Well, it's a one-time thing. So go for that. Go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter at pulltoopen.net, where you get full notes on every random adventure we go to. And you can also support us with a paid subscription on what is it? No, not Patreon. No, yes, Patreon.
Yes, that one.
So patreon.com/pulltoopen. Do that. And lastly, social media. We're Pull to Open or Pull to Open 63 on all the networks.
Yes, definitely share episodes with a friend. Do share this episode with friends who want to be teased and tantalized. Do not share it with any friends who are trying to avoid all spoilers before they watch the new series. Maybe share Church on Ruby Road podcast with them instead, because we, make a point of trying to avoid spoilers for the new season in that one.
All right. So, what is the biggest surprise?
Wow. Well, the biggest surprise, and I think the thing that may make you either you personally, Pete, either laugh or your head will explode, is the twist at the end of episode 2.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a twist, and I'm sure it's marked in red on that sheet in front of you. That's good to know. Wow. So, given the tone of the church on Ruby Road, depending on what you thought of it, and you can know what I thought of it by listening to our podcast there, I have to say that I wouldn't say it necessarily worries me, because I think my problems with the church on Ruby Road were tone. But do you say, like, I guess if you looked at sort of like the appreciation of the episode as a sort of an amplitude with high highs, low lows, would you say it's really like the amplitude is quite high, or is it more like a little bit, the highs don't get too high, the lows don't get too low? Like, are you clapping? Are you cheering? Are you groaning?
I think, you're having some strong reaction.
Got it. So it's high amplitude.
High amplitude. I think that's, it's definitely RTD getting in the face of the Disney audience and just allowing himself some Disney-esque flourishes here. Doing obvious homage to certain Disney things, and Space Babies, for example. The reason I think Pixar is because kind of imagine the end of WALL-E, the characters on the space station in WALL-E. Now imagine them being babies, and you're sort of getting close to that feel.
Right.
With the Devil's Chord, like it is quite literally about the highs and lows of emotion that music can both induce, and the lack of music can induce. Silence. They play with silence in a very interesting way, speaking of amplitude, in the Devil's Chord, in that there's a whole silence scene, which must be the longest length of silence probably in the history of Doctor Who. Even in those, even in like the Sensorites, where they ran out of money and they couldn't afford to get any incidental music in there. That's the only thing I think of that might come close to this.
Interesting. So it's a little bit, a taste of the episode I always think of with silence is Buffy the Vampire Slayer's Hush. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's
I'm not where they can't talk. Yeah,
very famous. Episode for virtually having basically no dialogue, almost no dialogue throughout. Impressive stuff. Okay, well, that's cool. That's very, very teasy. You're making me want to watch these even more now, which is, I think, this is the success. So if you had to predict what this is a lot of projection here, right? So feel free to kind of like answer this however you want. But now that we have the Church on Ruby Road and you've seen the other two, if you had to predict, who you are, someone in the future, maybe 5 years from now, looking back on this time in Doctor Who, what would this era be known as based on just, these 3 episodes? What would they think of it?
Well, I think that they are inevitably going to remember a fan freakout at certain things. Now, that may be positive, that may be negative. I think, we talked a lot about fourth wall breaking in the context of Mrs. Flood and her wink.
Right.
I mentioned that there's more of that going on.
More fourth wall breaking, or more Mrs. Flood, or more both?
More fourth wall breaking. More indication that there are characters that can break the fourth wall.
Interesting.
But also more fourth wall breaking in a more of a meta sense of like RTD is like very consciously kind of, tweaking the nose of people who are too serious about canon or about what Doctor Who is about, or about diegetic music, which we're going to have a long discussion about. The word diegetic is going to be, we're going to have debates over that word and how it applies to Doctor Who and whether what it means, in terms of the Doctor when he can hear, when the characters can hear music and when they can't. That's the sort of level of meta that we're playing at here. So it's actually quite interesting that RTD's kind of threaded that needle of, this says something about the show itself and about television itself while being kind of a Disney-esque romp. I think some people are going to like that. I think some people are going to hate it. And what we might actually see, I think, here is the people who grew up on New Who. Like, if you grew up on Rose, if Rose is where you started as a child, you might now be old enough to have a sort of a Phantom Menace style freak out of like, wait, this is ruining my childhood, So we might be getting to that stage of the cycle, right?
Wow. Okay. Interesting. So I'm sort of deciphering what you're saying there a little bit and trying to think about this in that it definitely sounds like, given everything we were just talking about in the amplitude, like RTD isn't playing it safe. Like, he's definitely here to take some risks. And if he's making some overall meta point about the show, and that's what's factoring into the whole Mrs. Flood thing, that could be interesting. I still don't think that was a great moment. I don't think you get away with it on that story level. You can go back to hear my full thoughts in that podcast.
Yes.
But I kind of like meta explorations. And with Doctor Who, there's always been little winks here and there, sometimes literally. But to sort of maybe take that to another level, that could be again, it's easy thing to fumble. For a new showrunner, I think I would be much more skeptical and much more kind of waiting for him to slip and have it fumble all over his face. But with RTD, got a little more faith that might actually work. So we'll see. We'll see.
It's subtle. It's subtle. I will say, you could easily miss it. You couldn't miss it with the Christmas special because it was right at that closing. She winks, fade to black, right? But I think now, looking back on that from the vantage point of seeing it happen again and again, I'm like, wow, that's actually quite creepy, and this is one thing that Doctor Who hasn't played with that is well in the Doctor Who remit of like a creepy thing that's sort of, in everyday life. Like if the characters on your television suddenly turn to you and talk to you as has happened sometimes in Doctor Who history, like that's a creepy thing, right? Because we're sort of used to the TV being a safe thing. So playing with that, with the notion that there are some characters who you thought couldn't see you, but then they indicate that they can see you, and they can do that because they have a certain power. That's interesting to me. Yeah, and I think it might divide fandom over whether it's interesting to them.
Kind of depends where it's going, but it's like I say, like if you're not going to take risks with the show, and doing sort of a meta storyline like this is very risky because to your point, like some people are going to freak out, some people are going to think it ruins the show. But if you're not taking risks with the show, like what are you doing? Like, I mean, I do want a balance though, right? Like because I do want just adventures and doing stuff, but it sounds like he's achieving that balance week to week.
Yes.
While still doing something overall interesting. Okay. Well, that's great.
And it's clear that part of what we're going to get this season is the fulfillment of the promise where RTD talked about the toy maker's legions, right? There wasn't just the toy maker who had come through from that other universe. That he wasn't the only godlike being that had been unleashed. They've already. It's not a spoiler to say the word pantheon. They've already talked about pantheon, but we are. In the Devil's Chord, we are finally aware that there is such a thing as a pantheon of characters who have just godlike powers.
Amazing. All right. Cool. All right. So let's wrap things up. If you could say just one thing to fans to prepare themselves for this season, what would it be?
Get ready, because even though RTD has Disney money and he's doing Disney homages and all of that, he's ready with something that could rock the entire show going back to 1963. I think that the choice of 1963 to meet the Beatles then was no accident. It allowed them, the Doctor and Ruby, to have a conversation about Totter's Lane and about Susan.
Oh, wow. That's not a spoiler? That's not in red?
That's not in red. That's not in red.
Wow, you heard it
yeah.
here first, folks, or at least maybe one of the articles that dropped a little bit ago. But this has been really educational. Wow. Thank you, Chris. This was
You're
great.
welcome.
All right.
I've said too much.
Thank you, listeners. Of course, like I said before, leaving a review or a comment or a follow on any of our social networks would be most appreciated if you like what you heard. Otherwise, we will hear you next time and see you next time. Perhaps we'll crawl out of the YouTube video and point right at you like I'm doing right now. And join us for another commentary, which when you hear this will be Thin Ice. Well, actually, it won't be Thin Ice. The next commentary you'll see is actually our real-time commentary on the first 2 episodes, where we will take them apart in detail, full of spoilers. So watch for that coming Friday night, pretty much almost as soon as we've watched them.
Wow!
And you'll get our initial raw hot take, and then you could listen to our Thin Ice podcast.
Yes, that's going to be interesting. It's going to be a hot take for you, a lukewarm take for me. I wonder. I'm looking forward to seeing them without my email splashed across the middle of the screen. I will say one thing about the Disney system is that is really dumb. Because
that's how they know it was you who leaked it.
It's how they know it was you. But you know what else is in the middle of the screen? The babies' mouths. So it was very hard to tell, like how well that worked. So I don't think
the valley even more uncanny.
Yeah. Anyway, there we have it. Yes, please come back and join us for a hot take on Space Babies and on The Devil's Chord and on something we haven't talked about yet, which is the trailer for episode 3, which was the one written by Moffat. And that is simply called Boom.
Nice.
And what's interesting about this trailer is how little is in it.
Oh, I like that. All right. Get excited and get meta with it. We'll talk to you soon, folks.
Bye, guys.